You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
We do more and more development projects, but all focused on supporting these founders with a great solution to scale their impact. Together with the team, we transformed the organization from an Amsterdam-based organization into opening offices in Uganda. If you are supporting entrepreneurs, your clients in Africa, why aren't you sitting next to them? One of my frustrations is that there's so much focus in Africa on who raised how much instead of who has grown its company from A to C. It's a melting pot of amazing people.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find inspirational people who are doing inspirational things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have Gert van Veldhuisen, who is an impact investor and Africa director at Unknown Group. Welcome to the podcast, Gert. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Fantastic. It's great to have you on the podcast. I know we planned this quite a while, so it's good that the date has finally arrived.
Yes.
So if you've ever listened to the podcast, I always like to start from the beginning. So I was hoping you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about Gert van Veldhuisen.
Sure. I can do that. I'm 46 years old, living in the Netherlands. I've been operating in Africa for a long time. Proud father of two boys. Started off as an entrepreneur in Holland with a secondment agency, which went quite well. I was able to sell the company in 2008, and then all of a sudden I had a bit of money but no idea. So I decided to start investing, which later happened to be called impact investing. As a private person, been investing in Africa, but also like Asia, but also in the EU. Grown into that, started as a director in a company with an NGO in Holland called Bid Network that I transformed into Africa. I'll probably tell you a bit more about that. And currently supporting the organization called Unknown Group as a director Africa, which means that we support local founders in scaling their solutions by collaborating with corporates, with public partners, and all kinds of other large partners.
Thank you for giving us an overview of your background and your journey into impact investing and Africa. You touched upon your work with Bid Capital Partners and the Unknown Group.
Yeah.
So I was hoping you could give us a bit more detail regarding the work you do, why you believe there's a need for that type of work in Africa. Just give us a general overview of those two organizations that you work closely within.
Yeah, sure. So Bid Capital Partners started off in 2007 as Bid Network, an NGO in Holland, which was really focused on supporting emerging market entrepreneurs and finding investors. But obviously, many of these entrepreneurs are full of ideas and potential, but they need some prep time. They need to be ready for an investment. So that's what we started doing. At a certain point, I was asked to join the organization at 2015 as the CEO, and I kind of brought it from the base in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. I brought it into Africa with offices in East Africa and built it into an investment advisory firm. Talking about Unknown Group, basically, it's a large organization. We work in 110 countries all over the world. We have basically two pillars. One is a early stage VC fund. The other one is a business development firm where we do a lot of open innovation with corporate clients. We do more and more development projects, but all focused on supporting these founders with a great solution to scale their impact. The office of Unknown Group is based in The Hague, but we have like global coverage of offices in Asia, Latin America, US, Middle East.
Fantastic. You touched upon, was it in 2021, how you successfully transitioned Bid Network from a Dutch NGO into what it is now, which is a successful investment advisory firm, and you have offices in East Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a particular reason why the organization decided to transition?
Well, it's an interesting story. Basically, the supervisory board of the previous NGO came to me and said, what we notice is that there's a huge dependence on donor funding. So every year, we need to run after new programs, which makes us very vulnerable.
Okay.
I was already an investor involved in several of these companies that they introduced to me. So I was well known within the organization. And they asked me, like, could you try to build a more sustainable business model for the organization, which would make us less dependent on external funding all the time? And I told the supervisory board, like, okay, I would be willing to do that, but things are going to change, so you better buckle up. And they were terrified, but they said, something needs to happen, so let's go for it. And basically what I did is, together with the team, we transformed the organization from a Amsterdam-based organization into opening offices in Uganda. So with the harsh consequence that we had to lay off most of the people in Holland. But we opened an office early 2016 in Uganda. That was our first African office, basically with the view that if you are supporting entrepreneurs, your clients in Africa, why aren't you sitting next to them?
Indeed.
Why don't you work together with them instead of like flying in and out, which is bad for climate, but it also doesn't make sense because you don't understand local context.
Yes.
And so the whole process from this NGO towards this investment advisory firm was like, how can we build a value proposition that is so good for the local entrepreneurs as our clients that they're willing to pay for this, which will allow us to become less dependent on all these programs. So, actually building a business instead of an NGO. And it's not been easy, let's be honest, because moving from Holland to Africa as an organization brings challenges, but also the internal transformation, which is also like culturally, we were not allowed. I said, we will not talk about beneficiaries anymore. From now on, it's clients.
Yes.
We don't talk about budgets. We talk about revenues, and we talk about value proposition, like how can we add value, and also forcing ourselves to take the clients serious. And by having them pay for the services, we were forced to deliver quality as well. And that was kind of the whole process we went through. Now we have offices in Uganda, Rwanda, opened up in Kenya recently as well. And so it doesn't mean that we don't collaborate in projects anymore. We still do all kinds of USAID, Feed the Future programs, but it's on a different way. It's more like equal partnership and more on a commercial base where we just deliver the output instead of like having to deliver hours of, but always the goal is to deliver quality for local clients, local entrepreneurs, and make sure that they pay for it. So that was kind of the process of Bid Network, where we went from this Dutch NGO towards this African investment advisory firm.
Thank you for sharing that. So you've beautifully detailed the transformation of the organization and how, I guess, it's seen you opening up offices throughout Africa, specifically East Africa.
Yeah.
And you obviously spend a lot of time within Africa, which I'm assuming you love the continent.
Absolutely.
So what is it about Africa that drew you in?
Oh, yeah. So how long do you have? It's a combination of so many things. It's a melting pot of, first and foremost, amazing people that I've met. It's the energy that people bring to the table. It's the way of how to treat each other, how to collaborate with each other, which is sometimes super complex and confronting and frustrating. Yes. But on a general level, I have so much fun with the African people I work with. It's a different way. Like Dutch people, we can be a bit distant, very blunt, direct. And in Africa, it's more like, it's almost a dance, how we try to communicate with each other, how we get things done. And even as a Mzungu, I just scratched the surface of understanding how it works. But already that for me is amazing. on the other hand as well, like there's this super fascinating, but also I would almost say like toxic combination of having so many opportunities on the one hand and the enormous amount of challenges on the other. Being able to select the right opportunities where you will not be drawn into a big swamp where you will go down can be very challenging.
Yes.
So there's an opportunity at every corner of the street, but only a few are really worth running after. And just for me, that combination of the people, the countries themselves, the opportunities, challenges, made it for me interesting to really bite my teeth in it and say, like, I want to try at least contribute to see if I can at least unlock a bit of these ridiculous, enormous potential that's out there and the energy. If I can try to play a part there, then I can potentially add so much value to the continent and at least have a lot of fun while doing that.
That's what it's all about. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for sharing your personal experience into how you've fallen in love with Africa. And also you detailed there how your work focuses specifically on impact investment in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
From your perspective, I know people have different opinions in terms of what it means. Can you tell us what impact investment means to you? And I guess give us some examples of some of the great work that you're doing on the continent.
Well, there's a few different things here. If you zoom on impact investments, for me, that's really like focusing on entrepreneurs, like true entrepreneurs that build a business model while at the same time creating impact. And this creating impact should be by default and not by accident.
Yes.
For me, that's very important. You know, just running after the money and don't care about what you leave behind is, for me, no impact investment. So there has to be an intrinsic motivation and proof that the entrepreneur is actually on its way to make a difference. So that, for me, is very important. And then when it comes to investing in a company like that, in my personal case, that could again be very, very commercial. Like, okay, you know, I want to give you the money, but these are the terms, and I want you to deliver this output, but especially also below the line, make sure that you make profits, because if you want to grow, you need the profits to grow the company. You can't go out there every single time to raise funding again, which is perhaps off topic here, but one of my frustrations as well, that there's so much focus in Africa on who raised how much.
Yes.
Instead of like who has grown its company from A to C, you know, and revenues or new clients. But back to impact investment. I think as an impact investor myself, what I always try to do is, given the fact that the company has a business model, the company has a clear impact goal, I will always try to see like how can I add value with the business knowledge that I've gained throughout these 2 decades that I've been an entrepreneur, as an investor, on like how to build the strategy, how to think about like how to organize your company. But maybe even most is, because I've been around for such a long time, is opening my networks and allowing these entrepreneurs to get to tables that they would normally not be able to get to.
Thank you for that, Gert. You detailed what impact investment means to you and the type of companies you focus on. You know, I know that impact investment can cover all areas of society. As you said before, as long as there's some kind of intrinsic DNA within the company, is generating positive, measurable social and environmental impact. But from your kind of perspective, what areas of society do you tend to focus on when looking for companies to invest in, and why?
When I go back to my first investment in Africa, or at least in emerging markets, was water.
Oh, interesting.
Clean drinking water, household purification system, super low tech, super basic, but so extremely impactful, because, you know, water is one of the most fundamental elements to people's lives, right?
Indeed.
So for me, that's kind of the thing personally that I was intrinsically motivated about, to see how I can add value to companies like that. Because I'm not a tech entrepreneur. I'm not familiar with all the tech metrics and everything. Of course, I've seen a few, but I have not been in that field for a long time. So my interest would be more, and that was also translated when we moved to Bit Capital Partners, into health, food and agri, renewable energy. We also did, of course, because of all the developments in East Africa, fintech companies, but that was not necessarily my focus as well. After phasing out of Bit Capital Partners from that daily management, last year I took a year off, thinking about okay, what's going to be the next step? And I realized that I wanted to focus more on how can I add value to handing over a decent earth to my kids. So my personal focus has also been a bit more on climate, circularity. All the people in the world are kind of messing up the earth. How can we find solutions that can add to a better world, a cleaner world, and a decent world for our kids?
Fantastic.
That's now become more of my interest. Doesn't mean I'm an expert there, but I'm learning. So those are the elements. And for myself, it doesn't necessarily have to be tech related. However, if I, for example, look at the Unknown Group as well, like a big organization, VC, we do focus on sectors like health, agriculture, food, energy a lot. But then we see tech, we see digital solutions more as an enabler,
Yes.
If you want to create scale, you do need to have some kind of digital backbone. That's just a simple fact. So in that respect, we don't necessarily focus on tech solutions only, but always in relation to certain sectors that are trying to make the world a better place.
Wonderful. So you've given us some insight into what areas of society that you focus on and why. So I was wondering if we could go a bit deeper and you could give us insight into your process, maybe thesis for discovering startups in Africa that have investment potential for you.
Well, the process from a more pragmatic, practical point of view, let's say as an international investor in my case, what I valued most and what I spend a lot of time on and what I noticed at the Bit Capital Partners added value is being locally embedded and being able to source, select, and collaborate with entrepreneurs on a locally embedded way is by far one of the most fundamental issues of selecting the right companies and discovering these startups. Example in this case is, I remember a long time ago, I think it was like 2016, 2017, when I was working with my director in Uganda. We found this super interesting company in my eyes. They had all the documentation ready. They had a wonderful story. And then my director came to me, my local director in Uganda, and he said, "Don't touch this man."
Interesting.
And I did not ask why, because he would never tell me, but we didn't. So I decided to follow him. And then you see the value of informal information, informal networks.
Yeah, and local knowledge.
Exactly. And later it appeared that this person was held by the URA, the Uganda Revenue Authority, because they didn't pay their taxes. And it turned out the company went down super quickly. But that's knowledge I would never, ever see or hear flying in and out as an investor. I would probably have spent, I don't know how long with this person, trying to figure out okay, what's going on? What are the opportunities here? And then you see okay, there's information I could have known if I would have worked with local partners. So in that respect, my faith of building a strong local team with Bit Capital Partners was even more triggered. And that's exactly what I do with Unknown Group now as well, is make sure that, because we're an international organization, we're not going to build companies everywhere, but we will have strong local partnerships in every single country we work in. If you then look further, so you have, based on informal knowledge as well, you have a good startup. Then, it comes down, depending on the phase you're looking at, but let's say it's a bit early stage, because that's my sweet spot. Then it's kind of basically always, it starts with the entrepreneur and team. Because basically what will happen is that the story they will tell you is the beginning, right?
Yes.
In many cases, that's still an assumption, basically. They may have 100,000 revenues, but it doesn't mean that the project is ready for scaling. In Holland, we have this saying first the guy, then the company in Dutch, of course, basically means like first focus on the entrepreneur, get a clear view of her or his understanding of the business itself, of the market. Does he or she truly know the solution or the problem that he's trying to solve? Does he know the customer? Does he have a clear customer segmentation, market demand? Does he know what he's doing? And of course, very important, is this person able to adjust in a changing environment? Because you will have to pivot all the time, figuring out like, okay, this doesn't work. What next? So there's a certain point of flexibility required and an openness in communication as well. An entrepreneur is in most cases a stubborn person. That's how we are. We know best. However, if you communicate with an investor, the least thing you have to do is your willingness to listen and to use some of the insights. And it should always have like a respectful way of working, making sure that you build a true partnership. And one of the things I used to do when I was still young is go to the bar with the entrepreneur if we were already quite far ahead in the process and get drunk together. And which may sound quite funny, but what I noticed is that, having an evening together with a couple of beers and telling each other like what moves you, tell me about your family, tell me about your background,
yes.
Tell me about you. Forget about the business. I want to get to know you. I want to build a relationship with you as a person. That has benefited heavily at times where we didn't agree in the company. Because that happens so many times that you just don't agree and you are straight against each other, but you have to solve it. So you have to have a good personal relationship. And that's my approach to building a relationship, is spend time together and get to know the person instead of only focusing on spreadsheets or whatever. For me, it has been a fundamental way of becoming a partner investor in the company.
And I think that's important in all aspects of business. Sometimes we're guilty of forgetting how important relationships are in terms of success in a business partnership, in a business relationship. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure. If you pull it off, in the end, it's not one organization working with the other, it's persons.
Yes.
So, that's the basics of everything. You have to have a personal relationship and a personal click.
Yes, because as you mentioned, there'll be difficult times, but if you have that relationship, you can communicate, and communication is key in all aspects.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you beautifully detailed the importance of local knowledge, the importance of understanding the entrepreneur and their team and building a relationship. So through your work, you provide a stage for those entrepreneurs to scale their business and accelerate their impact. I was wondering if your strategies in doing that in Africa differ to how you operate in other parts of the world.
Not necessarily, because I think, every entrepreneur that has great potential, especially early stage, needs that stage to make the next step. And that stage could be all kinds of things. Again, like Bit Capital Partners, that stage was like introducing them to investors with the goal to have them sign on the line that is dotted and send a check, right?
Yes.
Now with the Unknown Group, the organization is much bigger. We run a business competition, get in the ring in 110 countries every single year. We have global challenges with open innovation challenges with corporates like the Bayer Foundation or a lot of large organizations all over the world. And those activities also lead to providing them a stage. I've been talking a lot in Uganda recently because that's kind of my second home country. I've been talking a lot to local ecosystem players, and what they mentioned as well is, we are developing as an ecosystem, but it's all local. And what we need is a organization that can actually open the doors to the rest of the world, to provide a stage for international investors, for international corporates, for other relevant partners. What the Unknown Group, for example, does as well is like soft landing programs. We do that frequently with, let's say, embassies who want to promote the countries where they're active. So could be a soft landing program where African entrepreneurs are selected to come to the EU or the US and see if they can actually settle there and build the business there further. Those kind of connections and networks are something they don't have. And when you provide a stage, you want to show them and their potential to the rest of the world. A good example now, what we are doing with Eni, an Italian energy company in Angola, is they've asked us to search for some very good scale-ups, setting up pilot projects on renewable energy, access to water, environmental protection. So it's through that challenge that they actually get at the table of these normally super closed corporates where they can actually scale their solutions, their impact solutions. And that's what I mean with creating a stage is we open doors that normally would be closed to most of these entrepreneurs.
Sounds fantastic. So you mentioned some of the activities and initiatives that you organize in order to provide a stage for entrepreneurs. So I'm assuming during that process, there's some type of due diligence that takes place. So from an entrepreneur's point of view, how can an entrepreneur or a startup prepare themselves to go through the investor due diligence process?
Well, it depends per project, per investment, how you would look at a company, how deep you go. Because you can spend easily like a year on due diligence, but that's not really economically viable.
No.
But zooming out, looking at a due diligence, what I would recommend is at least look at 4 elements. First of all, like what is the product market fit, scalability opportunities, those kind of things. But also legal, like corporate governance. Is it properly registered? Does it have all the licenses and all the documentation, contracts, are they in order? Because what you don't want is to get in as an investor, finding out that all of a sudden you have a huge liability around your neck, which you didn't know.
Yes.
And of course, you can sign 1,000 warranties, but you prefer to avoid that before getting in. So besides what I said, commercial, legal, of course, you have the financial due diligence, checking on administration, having a clear understanding, for example, if you talk about tech companies, like the cost of customer acquisition, customer retention, these kind of metrics to see if they understand the metrics and what it costs and how they make money and those kind of elements to understand, to see if they are on track on that side. But also, did they register? Did they send in all the documentations to tax? Did they pay their taxes? Do they have the annual reports? Kind of the boring stuff, I would say. But the last but not least part, in my view, is like the organization itself and the HR. Like, what is the team? What is it, the dynamics? Who's doing what? If you want to grow, what do you need? And how will you cater for that? And what kind of capabilities, competencies? What's the capacity within the team? How will you make sure that you retain the people? What's a company policy on human resource development? Those kind of elements. Also, in my view, especially a bit early stage, super fundamental, because just missing out on one person can have an enormous effect on the development of a company.
Indeed.
And those kind of elements are the basis of due diligence, in my view. And of course, you have all these long lists that all the VCs send through. But, everybody has his own procedure for that. And besides these parts, I would always want to see, like, do they have a clear plan and a strategy? Because you can check everything on the due diligence, like, do they have all the paperwork in place and everything? But it's also like, okay, if we go on together, what would that mean? And what do you describe as success? And what's going to be each other's role and what expectations? And all those elements are, in my view, very, very important in due diligence as well. And more from a practical point of view, the last point would be like, have a data room. Simply a folder where you have clearly kept all the documentation so you can save a lot of money, a lot of time when this investor will ask for a data room, because they will. If you have a data room where you have very nicely, like, okay, finance, legal, that would save a ton of time.
So once you've gone through the due diligence process, I guess, and potentially invested, from your perspective or from your point of view, as an impact investor, what tends to be your role within the startups that you've supported? Where do you feel that you add value?
Yeah, I think I tipped on it before, but most of the work that I have been adding is supporting on strategy, thinking about like how can we create added value within the company? How can we make sure that we have an understanding of the customer and their needs and how we address their needs by offering them a solution they can't refuse? Up until like introducing them to large network partners to grow actually in scaling. I'm not the best guy for the finance and everything. No, that's not my strength. But more like building markets, having understanding about strategy and opening doors. That's most of the work that I've been doing in my companies. That's important to realize as an investor, especially angel investor yourself. And that's what I've tried always when I invested. Also understand your weak spots and organize them. So if you go into a company where you have seen that it needs some financial work, make sure you either organize it or find an angel investor you trust and you like, who is a financial expert to join you. That's how I kind of turn it around as well to create a proposition towards these entrepreneurs that makes sense for them as well to grow their business.
So would you say a lot of the value that you add is also through your extensive networks and partnerships that you've built through the years?
Yeah.
So I was wondering, can you tell us about some of the great partnerships that you have and the work that you're currently doing together in Africa in this space?
There's a number of layers when you look at partnerships, right? So when I started off with Capital Partners in Africa, I first tried to build local networks for sourcing, scouting, those kind of elements. Also, what I always did is when I started a new company, I wanted to make sure that we had a strong local lawyer as a co-founder, as a co-director.
Very important.
Because that would allow me to keep track or at least be on track on compliance. Because sometimes you just don't have a full understanding as a small company, changing regulations and rules. And if you have a local lawyer on board, that person will make sure that you stay on track.
And save you a lot of money as well.
Absolutely. But also, me being a Mzungu, an investor, that can also attract people who want to try and see if there's something to be gained from you.
Yes.
And having a strong lawyer next to me who's able to send a quick letter to that kind of person also worked in our advance. And it doesn't mean we did not have any court cases, but it means that at least we have been able to avoid a few. And it gave a clear signal, right? Like, okay,
yes.
Well, these guys have a strong lawyer as a co-director, so we better be careful. That's a very practical way of like setting up a company. If I look now, currently, the collaborations that we have is obviously operating in many countries. So I'm a director of the whole of Africa, which is a huge continent, 54 countries. So I will never, ever be able to build all these partnerships myself. So what we do is we have a team and we are building more and more like strong partnerships in the countries we're active in, about 25, with local ecosystem enablers that can help us on having a better understanding of what's going on in the market. And we can help them to give them a much larger platform where they can actually expose themselves to the rest of the world and also make sure that they benefit from this partnership as well. From a more programmatic approach, what I see now with Unknown Group, what I find very interesting is, for example, by our foundation, we've been running a campaign which was recently closed, starting soon next year, and that's called like the Women Empowerment Award.
Amazing.
And together with a foundation like that as a partner, we've been able to talk to more than 500 female founders in 35 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And we have been able, by our foundation, to provide funding for at least 5 of them and also provide them with acceleration support so they can actually grow. But not only those 5, but it's also like building role models, especially when it comes to female founders. Being able within this large group of female founders to share experiences and best practices and learnings, because especially when it comes to female founders, there's a lot to be done. And having a partner like Bayer Foundation for me is like super exciting because they allow us to go much faster. And we've just started, and I'm quite excited about that. And the last thing, what I think is very nice as well, is one of my investments from my early days, a water company. We just got an investment last year from Danone. And that's so super cool because instead of us as a relatively small company trying to move forward with trying to sell water filters, having a Danone on board can just speed up so ridiculously.
Yes.
Making use of their knowledge, their networks, marketing expertise, but also joint programs. Yeah, that's just a blessing. So those kind of partnerships, impact partnerships, have brought us a lot.
You mentioned how you're building with local ecosystem enablers.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone wanted to, say, enter the African impact investment space, how would they go about it? What would be your advice?
I wouldn't say run, Forrest, run. No, I think the time has come to be careful before running in. Couple of reasons for that. First of all, I see it is getting very, very crowded with venture capital firms.
Yes.
Many of those venture capital firms have written their prospectus somewhere in Europe or in the US, have raised funding in the US or Europe. And what I've seen in the past and still see is that they have not taken into account sufficiently the African context, which means that nothing is what it looks like. There's so many companies, there's so many opportunities. A bit of the same as I told earlier, like
yes,
the combination of a opportunity, but the question is like how many challenges are surrounding that opportunity. And what I've seen is that there's just so many VCs fishing in the same pond that you really have to consider like how unique is your proposition as a VC investor to get in, and how will you be different from the others, and what kind of proposition do you have to entrepreneurs to be able to get them in. And also I think it's important, if you start, please think about like where can I add value. For example, what I truly like is there's so much going on, well, at least in my bubble.
Yes.
There's so much going on female founders, General Lens investment, which has been going on for years now. But for me, it feels like there's been an acceleration in the last 2 years. And I really, really encourage companies to look closer into that, because it's just ridiculous if you realize that. I think it was research last year that only 2% of the investments is still going to founders or to female founders.
Yes.
Which I believe is an insult on the one hand, but also a huge missed opportunity on talent and potential. So advice to these investors would be like, do your research. Make sure that if you enter Africa, make sure you have a proposition that adds value, instead of just being in line with all the others.
I agree 100%. So you mentioned there how VCs should position their proposition as the space could get crowded in the near future and the need for more female founders to be funded. So from your point of opinion, in terms of how have you seen impact investment in Africa evolve during the time that you've been involved?
It's become way more crowded. I think there's still, the majority is still focused on tech solutions. And from my perspective, as a kind of non-tech investor, I think there's an opportunity there, and people are missing out on good opportunities to invest in. What I also see is that because it gets more crowded, it seems that there's more spillover into the region. let's say a couple of years back, 95% of the investors were based in either Nigeria, South Africa, or Kenya.
Yes.
Sub-Sahara, right?
Yes.
I think just having a look at what's going on, I see more and more of these investors actually now, because they see it's getting so crowded and there's new opportunities in the region as well, kind of they spread their wings into the region and move into, let's say, tier 2 countries as well, which I think is a very good sign because they have equal opportunities. So I think that's only good. That's one of the most important things, that because it gets crowded, the spread becomes a bit more logical.
I agree. So you beautifully detailed there how you've seen the space evolved during your time being involved. So if we look forward in terms of what current trends in the impact investment space are you currently excited about?
Without repeating myself too much, I think focus on women. I think it's a very important trend that I embrace wholeheartedly. Also looking more and more into, well, let's say climate resilient business models, climate solutions. There's a lot to be gained there. Food loss, I think, is a major issue. Yes. I was so shocked last year when I did my research on this to figure out that, for example, country like Kenya, it could go up to 50% of some fruits being lost before they even leave the farm. And then realizing that next door people are suffering malnutrition, and that's just a broken system. And I am super excited about, especially more and more like institutional players, the large ones, the donors that are focusing more and more on that and creating more systems and infrastructure to enable better utilization of these food systems. Just to give an example of a company, I think, we all know Twiga in Kenya. Yes. And what I like about it is that it doesn't only create business opportunities for smaller farmers, or at least for small farmers, but also they've been fighting pretty successfully food loss because of their enormous reach. And those kind of catalyzing digital solutions can make a huge impact. So I'm absolutely not against digital solutions. I think they're great in solving scalable solutions, absolutely. But these kind of solutions, I think, are badly needed.
I agree.
When you look at the opportunities in the market in general, there's a quickly growing number of middle-income consumers. So for any kind of consumer product, the market is so ridiculously growing. And the connectivity and all those elements of being able to reach your customers. And this has just started. And that's why I'm sometimes amazed about the fact that quite a few, let's say, Western corporates are still kind of reluctant to move into Africa because they think it's scary. They should have been there already for a decade. But I sometimes feel like I'm crying in the desert in that respect.
Yeah, I've had this conversation many times. I think by the time a lot of people decide to move into Africa, it might be a bit too late. The space might be crowded.
Absolutely. And the misunderstanding of so many Western people who think like, well, technology doesn't even exist in Africa. And I'm so embarrassed if I have those kind of discussions, besides the fact that people sometimes don't even properly know that Africa consists of so many countries. It's just like, yes, the ignorance, and it's not necessarily them to blame, but it's like an assignment to me to tell the story more and more.
Yes, I agree. It's up to people like ourselves to, I guess, tell the true story of Africa.
Absolutely. And just like yourself as well, having this podcast and allowing other people to learn more about Africa, their dynamics, I think, is super relevant.
So you've given great insight into the trends that you're excited about. If we look closer to home in terms of yourself, where do you see yourself, Unknown Group, Bit Capital, the work that you'll be doing in Africa in 5 years' time?
Well, I think, Bit Capital Partners will certainly move into more countries. We've seen that we have a good traction. We've been supporting more and more entrepreneurs locally in finding finance and getting them ready. So I'm pretty confident about that part. Looking at Unknown Group, we've really just started. We did some projects in Africa and some get in the ring business competitions in a number of countries, but those were more like reactive.
Yes.
I think, now building our network and the integrated approach that we have on access to market, access to funding, access to capital, access to talent, I see a lot of opportunities there to really be a strong partner in developing local ecosystems. And for us, it's very simple. If the local ecosystem is strong, we can provide better services to everyone in the rest of the world. So we will be focusing a lot on that part. And hopefully in 5 years, I can look back and say, like, well, we did this together and we've been able to build strong local ecosystem partners where actually entrepreneurs have some kind of a level playing field. That would be a success there. For myself, I hardly ever look further than like a couple of years. I just don't know what's going to happen. I think I'm planning at least to be part of a known group for a couple of years and build Africa together, and also making sure that these promises are being made and that we have strong partnerships on the ground. So we are less and less needed, hopefully even. It's a bit of a cliche, but I think, having made myself the promise, whenever my kids, they're growing up right now, when they come to me
yes,
and they say like, okay, so we know the earth is kind of screwed, but what did you do to prevent this, or at least to contribute to a better earth? And for me, that's one of the things that I want to have a damn good story.
Amazing.
Basically, the next 5 years will be story building. I want to make sure that everything I do, I can be accountable to my kids and tell them about the work that I've been doing, besides building companies, also like trying to leave a legacy.
I'm truly excited to see what you guys will be doing in 5 years' time, and thank you for sharing your personal purpose in terms of why you're doing what you do, in terms of the great work of investing in Africa. Thank you for that. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, proverbs, or even affirmations that keep us going when times are good or when times are challenging. I was wondering if you have one that you can share with us today.
Yeah, it's kind of close to what I was just telling you. A couple of years ago, I read somewhere, I think it's an old Indian saying. The saying is basically like, we did not inherit our earth from our ancestors, but we borrow it from our children. And in my view, that's something that everything I do, I want to put next to that and say like, okay, well, how do I contribute to that? For me, that's a very important thing. And, besides that, just keep on going. And when the going gets tough, the tough get going. There's so many.
I think there's a song in there somewhere.
Yeah, no, but that's kind of the lifestyle you have as an entrepreneur, and when things get tough, you just get excited.
Yes.
Especially as an African entrepreneur.
And the times will be tough, but as you said at the beginning of the conversation, there's a energy about Africa.
Absolutely.
And a kind of enjoyment, even during the most challenging of times, that keeps you going,
yes.
Keeps you positive, and I guess keeps you grounded to your purpose.
Yeah, for sure.
Unfortunately, we're coming to the close of the conversation, but I was hoping if you have any closing remarks, final calls to action for people who are looking to explore the impact investment space in Africa or are just interested in Africa in general.
Africa just has so much potential, but don't get scared of the first disappointments or first challenges you face, because behind those challenges, there's so much energy, potential, love even, and persistence, resilience, that I believe that the African continent, both on like a societal level, as like climate, as business, deserves a much more equal stage to others than it has right now. And I just want to make sure that I contribute to this. And I hope that everybody who's listening to this will just think for themselves, like, okay, how is my role in this? And how could I potentially add value while enjoying it? And also, if it hurts, you'll get over it. But as long as it hurts for a good reason, then just keep on going. And one person said to me once, like, in Africa, the highs are higher and the lows are lower. But that's something you have to go through. And in the end, if you manage to build something successful, it will be very, very rewarding. But it will not be thrown at you for free. So be persistent and enjoy the road while getting there.
Thank you for that beautiful closing remark and final call to action. That's been an extremely insightful and, pardon the pun, impactful conversation. Thank you for your time, Gert.
Thank you so much, sir.
I've enjoyed today's conversation.
Likewise. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and we'll talk soon for sure.
We definitely will. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.